With the release of those 12,000 fighters, ISIS would probably look upon that as a kind of standing army where they could regroup. Of course, not all of those people would actually want to, but it's certainly an opportunity in ISIS's mind.
And now crowds are rallying in Damascus today following a call by rebel leaders for Syrians to take to the streets after Friday prayers to celebrate the victory of the revolution. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer will join other G7 leaders in a call on the situation in Syria this afternoon. There's concern about a potential resurgence of ISIS and about chemical weapons falling into the wrong hands. The now deposed President Assad, remember, used chemical weapons against his own people during the 13-year civil war. And there's also this big issue about what happens with these thousands of ISIS fighters that have been held in these Syrian camps. And Kurdish soldiers were guarding them, but now Kurdish officials are warning that the security in these Syrian prisons has been weakened quite a lot, and actually these ISIS fighters could get out. Well, let's speak with Lizzie Dearden, who is a Home Affairs and security journalist. She's also the author of the really interesting, brilliant book called Plotters, the UK terrorists who failed. Lizzie, welcome to the show.
Hello.
So look, you've got this exclusive interview with the Kurdish foreign minister talking about these ISIS fighters. Tell us what he told you.
So the minister is a woman called Ilham Ahmed.
Sorry.
Not a problem at all. But she was telling me about how they view the current situation. And although they have many things that they would like to see, one of the issues they are concerned about, like you say, is the security of the camps and prisons that they have been guarding since the Kurdish forces that we supported as a country, as a military, overthrew ISIS and retook its territory in 2019. They have around 12,000 male captured ISIS fighters from around the world, and also between 2,000 and 2,500 families held in separate camps. And ISIS, in its propaganda and in its kind of communications, has been inciting its fighters and its supporters to free all of those people for many years. And now the concern is that because the Kurdish forces are being drawn away into fighting against Turkish-backed rebels, security at the prisons and camps will weaken, and either people inside will seek to break out, or cells of ISIS militants will try to take opportunity of that weakening and break in and free people.
And if a significant number of these ISIS fighters do manage to escape from these prisons, what could the consequences be, Lizzie?
Well, effectively, we don't know, but the kind of thinking and the reason that many authorities have been trying to stop this happening is the first thing that no one wants to happen is ISIS to have a ready pool of recruits. It had suffered as an organisation from the Kurds being able to retake its territory. It has essentially dissolved in Syria, but small cells remain. With the release of those 12,000 fighters, ISIS would probably look upon that as a kind of standing army where they could regroup. Of course, not all of those people would actually want to, but it's certainly an opportunity in ISIS's mind. And the other thing is that a lot of those prisoners are from other countries. We don't know exactly how many Brits are in there. And the government, like in the case of Shamima Begum, has been trying to prevent people returning by doing things like removing their citizenship. But that doesn't mean that they wouldn't try. And it doesn't mean that through illicit means or smuggling, some people could hypothetically succeed into getting back into this country. And that's something that the government and the security services do not want to see happen in an uncontrolled way. And that's one of the biggest concerns right now.
I mean, that's deeply alarming and something that people will be really, really worried about. I mean, just to explain as well to our listeners, why were so many of these sort of ISIS fighters, why were they being held in these camps in Syria? Why Syria?
Well, Syria was the heartland of what ISIS at the time called its caliphate after it advanced through parts of Syria and Iraq in 2014. It lost its major Iraqi territories more quickly than it lost the Syrian ones. And it wasn't until 2019 that the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces managed to push into all of ISIS's territory, including its de facto capital of Raqqa. And as they went, they were capturing ISIS fighters and people who they deemed to be their wives and children. And I think at the time it was done as a kind of temporary measure. As the advance was continuing, obviously they didn't want people to be able to escape and reinforce ISIS elsewhere. But there wasn't really any medium or long term thinking about what would then happen. And since 2019, those Kurdish authorities have been saying to international governments, please take these people. We cannot hold them forever. We don't have the resources. It just doesn't make any sense. And also, it's not like these people have been on trial, right? It's clearly no one's massive concern for people who joined ISIS, but this is extrajudicial apart from immensely impractical. And for years, the Kurds' calls for countries to take these people back have largely fallen on deaf ears.
And do you think there might be any change in policy with a new government in terms of bringing people back, like Shamima Begum?
I don't know. Certainly, Labour hasn't actually said anything about this yet. There have been internal warnings from watchdogs and committees and security officials in this country about exactly this potential, the potential that the security situation in Syria would break down and that everything could go wrong and these camps would not be secure. So it's something that the Conservatives were also aware of. And they adopted a policy of what the terrorism watchdog Jonathan Hall has labelled strategic distance. And it's partly a security gamble to say, well, we would rather just try to keep them out. And it's also partly a political one. It would be as difficult for Labour to argue as it would have been for the Conservatives that we should invest and organise as a country to bring these people back in a safe way. It would take a huge amount of resource. And I think politically, even with the situation we're seeing at the moment, it may be difficult for anyone to have the appetite to argue for that publicly.
Absolutely. Look, and just before we let you go, Lizzie, look, obviously there's lots of celebration about the fall of the Assad regime, but I think you'd be naive to having had the discussion we've had, you'd be naive to just say, oh yeah, everything is going to be all right. You're someone who studies this very closely. You're kind of steeped in all of the different clans and tribes and everything. What's your sense of what will happen in Syria?
Yeah, probably not a very helpful answer, but we still don't really know. The main rebel group that led the kind of assault on Assad's regime very recently that caused this fall was once Al-Qaeda, but officially cut ties in 2016 and then formed a much broader coalition. They've always been very focused on Syria in a way that ISIS wasn't necessarily. ISIS always had a kind of dual aim of global terror as well as whatever it was doing in its territories. So when people talk about the potential of a terrorist group taking over Syria, it's true to an extent they are banned, but at the moment they are not behaving with the same goals and modus operandi as ISIS ever did. So I guess what we're all waiting to see is whether they will somehow continue evolving into some kind of political Islamist movement, perhaps like the Muslim Brotherhood was once in Egypt, where they could conceivably make up part of a government or some kind of ruling coalition, or whether we are just going to see another fracturing into a new stage of the civil war, where all of the different groups that are in play, backed by all of the many different opposing countries who have completely different aims in Syria, will just end up fighting again.
And very quickly, what could it mean for women and girls? Because I remember when Afghanistan, everything happened in Afghanistan, people originally were like, oh, the Taliban seemed like a bit different from the previous Taliban, cut to women literally being erased. Just very briefly, what's your sense on what this group might be like towards women?
It again depends whether the kind of early signals they've been sending are true ones or not. So I've been watching footage from Syria, and it's notable to see that there are women openly walking around the fighters from these Islamist groups, not wearing a hijab, out in public. All positive signs. Female news anchors on what was state television are also not covered. So there are some early signs there, but at the moment, HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, this winning group, is not in government. And so it could be very negative for women and girls, or there could be some more positive pluralist transition. But at the moment, we just have no idea.
Yeah, we just know. Lizzie, fascinating conversation. Thank you very much for your time. That's Lizzie Dearden, who's a real expert in security. She's the author of the book Plotters, the UK Terrorist Who Failed.